Hey everybody, what's up? Let's talk about The Eyes of My Mother. It's a horror film about a young woman named Francisca who lives on a secluded farm with her parents where they raise cows and other animals, and her mother, being a former surgeon from Portugal, in the beginning of the film teaches her how to dissect animals, how to remove eyeballs from animals, how to basically be unfazed by death, how to basically be unfazed by cadavers. Tragedy eventually strikes the idyllic country life of her family, leaving Francisca deeply traumatized and also awakening her some very dark and disturbing desires and curiosities. Oh boy, this is one hell of a fucked up movie, folks, I'm warning you. I have watched a whole bunch of horror films lately, which is something quite unusual for me because I am not a gigantic fan of the genre, but I was actually quite surprised to see how many good ones were released during 2016. To give you just a couple of examples of what I've seen more recently, Train to Busan, The Monster, and Lights Out. I enjoyed all three of these films, they are good horror movies, but there's just one thing I can't say about them, and that is that I would never consider them to be creepy or even scary for that matter, not even in the slightest. Maybe The Monster just a tad bit, I could say, like, kind of got under my skin, but mostly these films weren't really doing it for me as far as scare tactics go. They are entertaining films, the scenarios are incredibly fun, but that just goes to show that the filmmakers thought of these films more as scenarios, first and foremost, and then just wrote the stories around them as more or less of an afterthought. Like in Train in Busan, our characters are fighting zombies on a train. In Lights Out, our characters are fighting an evil entity that can only appear in pitch darkness, and in The Monster our characters are fighting an animal-like monster in a deserted road in the middle of nowhere. I guess I could say that some of these films tried to have more story in them than the others, like Lights Out for example, which is the story in that film I wasn't all that crazy about, but at least I can give them props for trying. But in The Monster for example, the story is basically almost non-existent. But hey, the visuals and the atmosphere more than make up for its shortcomings, and these films are good, but they're not anything I would ever consider to be classics, or they're maybe not even something I would ever watch again, and they didn't exactly leave me with anything to ponder about, if you know what I mean. The Eyes of My Mother is something pretty different. It's more of a character study. It's something very introspective. It's that, if that's something I can say about the film. It seems to be much more about this one character rather than about something exterior, where you constantly feel like you are with this character, like you are in her head and in her very delusional worldview, and it's not a comfortable ride at all. The film is pretty reminiscent to films like Les Diaboliques and Eyes Without a Face, two French films from the 50s, two of the best horror films ever made. If you haven't seen these and you're a horror fan, please do yourself a favor and watch these. And it's also very reminiscent because there's nothing paranormal here at all, and it just goes to show you that the most frightening of monsters are human beings. These are stories about people disappearing, people capturing, kidnapping other people, people torturing, mutilating other people, and man, nothing gets more under my skin than human beings being cruel to other human beings. The film is also incredibly David Lynchian most of the time, and I mean that in the absolute best sense possible. Like everything from the excellent black and white cinematography to the fact that the film is split up into 3 parts, 3 chapters if you will, which here feels a lot more deliberate than it would be in a David Lynch film. Here it's a lot more because of narrative reasons, while in a David Lynch film it's probably something that's more subdued most of the time. But even in his films, I mean, there are different parts, there are different chapters to the story, especially things like Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive for example. And the acting, and oh my fucking god, the acting in this film. I mean, the body language, the gesticulation, the gestures, there's not an incredibly huge amount of dialogue in this film. It's pretty sparse, almost to the point of being non-existent. This is pretty much visual storytelling at work here, folks. And the acting, man, I can't emphasize it enough. Just the way these characters react to some of the most horrid things, the way they talk about some of the most horrid things, the very few times they do talk, is just so David Lynchian that in the beginning of the film I could have swore that I was watching some sort of spiritual sequel or spiritual successor to Eraserhead. And that didn't bother me at all, because like, look at it this way. Have you ever had a band you really liked, but a band that only released maybe 1 or 2 albums max, but then other bands came along and released their own albums but basically just copied the sound of the original band? Because it happens to me all the time, and it's not something that bothers me. I listen to a lot of black metal and death metal, and there are many obscure bands who probably have only released demos or just 1 album or 2 albums, and then a whole bunch of other bands came along that copied that original band's sound. And it's like the old band released a new album. It's the same thing here as well. well. Like David Lynch, he doesn't make feature-length films anymore, but there are new filmmakers, up-and-coming filmmakers, who make films in that same sort of style, and they are good. So I applaud that. It's not something that bothers me. It's not something that I view as plagiarism. And it's also not very David Lynchian in a lot of other aspects. Like I said, there doesn't seem to be anything paranormal going on here. There's nothing surreal. It's a very straightforward narrative, a very simple story. The three parts, the three chapters are all in chronological order, and they do make sense within the film because years go by between the three parts when our characters are in different stages of their lives, and it's a very easy film to follow. Everything like basically connects and makes sense. It doesn't really leave like any unanswered questions, and even when things are not completely spelled out for us, we can pretty simply fill in the blanks and make sense of everything. And that's actually where one of my very few gripes with this film comes from, is that it's such a simple story and it's such a short film. I think it's only 76 or 77 minutes long, that I would have wished that things were just a little bit, just a tad bit, just a hair more fleshed out than they actually are. Because, okay, I understand horror films are more about the disturbing stuff and about the atmosphere rather than the story itself, but this film really wanted to be a character study, and for the most part, it succeeds in being one. So maybe just having a little bit more character in my character study would have helped. Nevertheless, this is a very sick and twisted film for some very sick and twisted people. And if you happen to be one of those people, like I am, then I definitely recommend checking The Eyes of My Mother out. This one truly got under my skin, folks. I mean, I swear. It's not a masterpiece or anything, but it's highly, highly, highly effective. And while we're on the subject, like, I want to ask you guys, you can leave me in the comment section some of your answers. Like, what are some of your favorite, like, non-traditional, non-jump scary horror films? I'm really interested to know. Thanks for watching my review. As always, if you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you later with other reviews. Until then, take care, folks. Goodbye.